Forgotten Pokemon moves. Does that sound familiar? It's been over 7 months since I've talked about Pokemon's most forgotten moves, and given that there are over 900 of them, there were a lot that slipped through the cracks. Usually, moves would become forgotten due to either being learned by very few also forgettable Pokemon, being too gimmicky, or simply being outclassed by other moves in the future. But recently, a thought occurred. Would it be possible to make these forgotten moves more desirable? What changes could be made to buff them while also still being realistic and staying faithful to their design? Well, that's what I'm doing today. Let's look back at some of the most unloved and obscure Pokemon moves, along with a few other ones not mentioned before, and see how or if they could finally get the recognition they crave. To start things off, let's look back at one of the coolest sounding moves in the entire series that's never gotten a taste of the spotlight due to being so out of the way and underwhelming, that being Octazooka. As the name suggests, it's learned by octopus Pokemon only, or in other words, it's only learned by 2 Pokemon. Well, that's already a bad start, but to make things even worse, it has 65 power and an 85% accuracy, which is extremely underwhelming given that the only 2 Pokemon that can learn it only get it later in the game. Oh yeah, and Grapploct really doesn't need this move since it isn't a water type and has low special attack, which leaves Octillery as the only Pokemon who can use it. Actually, no, because you need Surf to get Remoraid in the first place, so there is literally no need to keep Octazooka. So how would I make this move stand out more? Well, it's honestly pretty simple. The Pokemon that it was originally made for, Octillery, is based off of a tank, so to play into its ink being shot out like a missile, I would lower its accuracy to 75%, but increase its power all the way to 120 to illustrate the power of a cannonball. Finally, since Octillery's ink can obscure its opponent's vision, I think making it a guaranteed accuracy drop would be more fitting and wouldn't be too broken because of the move's low accuracy and Octillery's low speed. Now, Octazooka will actually be something worth keeping if you want to play a bit riskier. Let's talk about a move that I haven't mentioned before in any previous video, because believe it or not, there are still a lot of Pokemon moves that nobody really talks about. This one's a bit strange, as there's nothing inherently wrong with it, it's just kinda there. I'm talking about Crush Claw. In a way, it's kind of an alternative to Slash, where instead of being 100% accurate with a high crit chance, it has a 95% accuracy, slightly higher power, and a 50% chance to lower the opponent's defense. In Gen 3, it was exclusive to Zangoose, but over time it's been given to more Pokemon. Still, however, the list of Pokemon that can learn it is pretty limited, and I think this limited learn list and somewhat mediocre power make it an overlooked move choice compared to the many other normal type moves out there. Honestly, Crush Claw doesn't really need that big of a change made to it. All I would really do is just make it 100% accurate and have a base power of 85, which would essentially make it a normal type liquidation. And given that so few Pokemon can learn it, it makes sense to make it just a bit more special. Just like with Octazooka, here we have yet another old move that sounds really cool, but has been worthless ever since its introduction. Remember those terrible multi-hit moves like Double Slap and Fury Attack? Well, Game Freak decided that it was a great idea to also include another less seen one, Spike Cannon. I guess it's technically better because it has 100% accuracy, but come on. Not only is it a late game garbage move, but what you're looking at right now is the entire list of Pokemon that can learn it. Not like they'd even be using it anyway since it's barely usable. So let's fix that. The first change is a no-brainer. Make it a Steel type move. I mean, you're telling me that an attack that shoots sharp spikes isn't a Steel type move? The type change would also give a bit more type coverage for the few Pokemon who can learn it, which leads to the second, also obvious fix, give it to more Pokemon. This one just doesn't make any sense. I feel like most Pokemon that can learn spikes should also be able to learn Spike Cannon since they both require launching spikes. Some good candidates would be Forretress, Skarmory, Quillfish, Aggron, Cacturne, and Chestnut. They'd all benefit from it, and it would also make Spike Cannon a unique multi-hit move, rather than yet another useless Gen 1 throwaway. If there's one type that has remained dominant for most of Pokemon's existence, it's the Dragon type, arguably the most iconic type in Pokemon history. It contains some of the coolest designs and the most powerful Pokemon, most only being encountered at the very end of one's journey. And of course, a type so mythical and revered comes with an onslaught of powerful moves. You've got Draco Meteor, Dragon Dance, and Outrage. But there's one Dragon-type move that has slipped underneath the cracks ever since its introduction with no clear reasoning for it being added: Dragon Rush. At first, its 100 base power seems pretty good, but then you look at its accuracy. 75%? Yeah, it has a 20% flinch chance, but I don't see why its accuracy has to be sacrificed so heavily for that. The weirdest thing is that it's been in every game, so Game Freak does acknowledge its existence, but it still hasn't received any notable buffs. The main point of Dragon Rush is to be a reckless, all-out physical attack, and another dragon move just like that is Outrage. However, Outrage has the drawback of forcing you to use it and getting confused after. I think a simple way to give Dragon Rush a niche would be to increase its accuracy to 80%, its power to 140, and instead of potentially causing the opponent to flinch, it makes the user take 1/2 of the damage it dealt as recoil. Outrage would still technically be the safer move, but Dragon Rush now has the niche of being the strongest physical dragon move if you're daring enough to use it. You're probably starting to realize that many of these moves are signature ones that are unnecessarily bad. Well, get ready, because here is one that is as old as Pokemon itself, yet the amount of Pokemon that can learn it can literally be counted on one finger. I'm talking about Egg Bomb, a move that genuinely has zero reason to exist. Its base 100 power is nice, but all of this is thrown away when you look at its abysmal 75% accuracy. And it's not like it's anything special either. It's yet another boring normal type move because 1998 Game Freak for some reason loved making everything normal type. And it doesn't even get a secondary effect to go along with it. And to top it all off, the few Pokemon that can learn it have no reason to use it. Chansey and Blissey can't deal damage, Exeggutor has lower physical attack, and Mew? Well, you're better off using anything else. To help it stick out not like a sore thumb, I would first increase its accuracy to 90% and make it a special attacking move, essentially removing its competition from Double Edge and Return and giving it its own niche. My second change will be to give it a 20% burn chance, since a bomb in tall grass would probably cause a big fire. This will make it a thematic move for both Blissey and Exeggutor and would also carry the threat of burning the opponent, making it a viable choice rather than just being one of those moves you see once or twice and then never again. And now we have the final two moves, arguably the most useless and forgotten ones of all time. I feel like most moves have some purpose, no matter how niche, but these two genuinely serve the purpose of just taking up space in the game's code. The first of the two is by far the worst one, but I do feel like it's more well known, that being Razor Wind, a move that's been lurking around Pokemon's darkest corners since day one, yet has remained untouched by any player for its entirety. Underwhelming is an understatement. It's an 80 base power normal type move that has an increased crit chance. Okay, that sounds pretty good. However, for absolutely zero reason, it's also a 2-turn attack, and on the first turn, you do nothing. In Gens 1 and 2, it was somehow even worse, having a pitiful 75% accuracy. Yeah, 75% accurate. One turn doing nothing, all to do just alright damage. Thankfully, in Gen 3, it got boosted to 100%, which it should have been in the first place, but there's still no reason to use it. Being a 2-turn move, it's always going to kinda suck competitively, but in a playthrough, I feel like it could be made at least noteworthy. The first change I would make is to make it a flunk type move, because, well, Razor Wind. This feels like just another case of Gen 1 Game Freak making every move normal type for no reason. Secondly, since the user has to whip up a strong wind, the move could give a +1 speed boost on the first turn, as well as activating in just one turn if a tailwind has been set up. You're probably confused as to why I didn't increase its power, but I felt that with the buffs, a stronger Razor Wind would be too powerful. With Tailwind, it essentially becomes a special attacking version of Drill Peck with a high crit chance. Or, in other words, something actually worth considering to use as a move. But now, it's time to go back to the very beginning. Almost 1 year ago, at the very end of my first Forgotten Moves video, I talked about what could possibly be the most forgotten, unnecessary move in Pokemon history. A move whose whole existence is somehow even more baffling than Razor Wind. Did you forget about it? Well, I'll remind you what I'm talking about. Barrage. Just like Razor Wind, it's been in the game since the very beginning, but never has had a single moment of prominence. What does it do? Well, it's another one of those normal type multi-hit moves, but the problem is that it's only ever been learned by 2 Pokemon, Execute and Exeggutor. two Pokemon that aren't normal type and have much higher special attack stats, so there's no reason to use the move when Bullet Seed exists. And sadly, Game Freak seems to have given up on it because not only has it never received a single buff, but it's also been removed since Gen 8. So let's try to make Barrage a signature move actually worth keeping. The first thing we need to keep in mind is that Execute learns it at level 1. Another thing we should keep in mind is that Execute is also part Psychic type, so it's kind of an easy decision to make Barrage a Psychic type special attacking move instead. It would end up being Execute's special early game psychic attack instead of Confusion. I see it as being like a telepathic barrage on the opponent's mind. To keep it up to speed with the other multi-hit elemental attacks, I'd boost its power to 25 and raise its accuracy to 90%. Lastly, each hit could also have a 10% chance to confuse the target. Yeah, that would make Barrage annoying to deal with, but you have to remember that Barrage is only learned by the Execute line, and a signature move should be something to remember, not just a randomly inserted idea that spends its entire life drifting around in complete obscurity. And that's the main purpose of trying to buff all of these moves. Starting in Generation 8, Game Freak decided to start cutting a bunch of previously underused moves. I get that it's an out with the old, in with the new type of scenario, but it seems like with each generation, the assortment of moves just gets more and more clogged. Why don't they just go back and improve these clearly outdated and flawed moves? I don't think many people would object to that, but I guess until then, these moves will just be left at the bottom of the bin, either to be faintly remembered as an unloved relic of the past, or worse, completely left in the dust. After all, if nobody remembered it, perhaps it never even existed in the first place.